Welcome to Chart Reflections. We are a weekly Zoom session, live Zoom session, where students in our school come together, and we usually have a guest who gives us their birth chart and some questions to analyze and to discuss with them. And so this is a wonderful, I think, offering that we do at our school for our top two tiers, our moons and planets tiers. Um, and also for the asteroid tier, which is one tier below those two tiers, our students receive this recording. But tonight we are going to do something a little different, and we are going to talk about transits and have questions about transits and what transits are. Our next class that we're beginning on June 3rd will be about transits. So we thought we would just dive in and see what people's questions are and discuss that topic. So that's what we're going to do tonight. Yeah, so thanks for joining me. And maybe we could see if people have questions about what is a transit. Are people pretty familiar with them? Yeah, what does it mean? I think of a transit. Well, what a transit is that, we have our natal chart. We have that moment in time that gets recorded onto our charts, that moment we're born. And that's a static um, representation of ourselves and who we are and who we can become. And transits are from the moving planets making a relationship to that snapshot in time. And so those relationships happen through specific angles, specific geometric angles that we call aspects. And so when there is a moving planet that makes a particular aspect to a planet or a point in our natal charts, that's called a transit. And those are the natal transit. Those are the personal transits. There's also a thing in astrology that where we track the transiting planets that are transiting each other, and they're not transiting a static chart, but like how the sun and moon through a lunar cycle are in aspect with each other through the different phases, right? So that is often called a mundane transit. So how Saturn and Uranus have been squaring each other for the last year and a half. That's not in relationship to any natal planet. That's just how those two planets are in relationship to each other right now. So those are two different kinds of transits, and we'll dive deeper into natal transits and talk about tracking mundane transits too in the class. But yeah, how do you think about this topic? Are you bringing any questions or things you want to discuss?
Yeah, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Um, your thoughts on interplanet transits versus generational planet transits?
Mm-hmm. So I think you're asking the difference between transits from outer planets and transits from the more faster moving personal planets. Yeah.
Right. So like a Venus, uh,
Mm-hmm.
just as an example, Venus
Right.
just moved into Aries. So if I had a planets in Pisces, Venus just recently transited them.
Right.
But say Neptune is still hanging out in Pisces and kind of sitting around that 20 to 25-degree mark right now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so much slower. So your thoughts on I guess the quick versus slow.
Yeah. What I learned and what I find to be really true is that the slower moving the planet is, the more that transit will impact our lives in a bigger way. So those slow moving planets, Pluto through Saturn specifically, are really the planets of change. Jupiter is kind of in the middle. Jupiter moves, through a sign in about a year. and it can go in and out of a sign. So it's not just one, consecutive 12 months, but that's the general 30 degrees of the zodiac. It will transit in a year. So Jupiter transits aren't as long lasting. They're more of, I really think of them as maybe 3 weeks at most of having an effect. Another way, another thing that we consider is it's like, how long does a transit last? When do you consider it starting, and how do you know when it's over? That's another thing. But definitely we know that the slower the planet, the more it's going to be in our lives. So for instance, Pluto could easily be um, in our lives and affecting our lives for a couple of years or more, maybe. Different astrologers will extend that time of influence quite a bit or get it real, real narrow. Um, I tend to really focus on the exact transits, but my philosophy also is that a transiting planet is here to either teach us a lesson or help us, kind of grow or evolve into some other purpose that we have in our lives. There's a lesson plan that each planet has. And the more willing we are to respond to that energy, that planet, the long, that's when that transit begins. So it's not necessarily like nothing's happening in our lives and then the exact transit happens and then all of it happens. It's more like there's this build up, this crescendo, this like, oh, something's coming my way. This is really here. And okay, I'm starting to resolve. I'm starting to figure it out. Um, I'm curious. I can talk more about that crescendo, that kind of like arc of influence. But have people been tracking their own planets? How transits? I mean, do you have an experience of how long they last and when you notice when they're really in effect?
I mean, I can talk again. You do my birthday reading every year.
Mhm,
And that's been helpful to frame out, especially those longer
mhm.
cycles.
Yeah.
Um, and that's been interesting. I'm really interested too in like mundane transits, like the things everyone is experiencing. For example, going back to our recent election of Venus being conjunct Jupiter in Pisces, like everybody in the world is experiencing Venus conjunct Jupiter in Pisces a few days ago. What does that what is that energy? How do you tap into that versus, oh, that Jupiter in Pisces is also conjunct my natal Jupiter in Pisces. What does that mean for me, right? Like that looks different than, say, if it was opposed, my, for example, Jupiter in Virgo.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, So I will answer your first question. So for me, the slower the planet moves, the more impact it's going to have, the longer the effect of its transit's going to be. And then we have those Mars through Sun, with the Moon really is the fastest. So those transits will impact our day. It will impact our week, maybe in the instance of Mars, but it's not going to impact us in a profound way. It's more of like, oh, this is my mood or this is my energy. However, this is very true. A faster moving planet, even the moon, especially the moon, can trigger a slower transit that we're having. So say we're having a Saturn transit and the moon comes into aspect with Saturn and suddenly that Saturn transit activates. So it's less about having that Saturn transit be exact, but more about what are the other planets doing to bring that in, and activate it. And so, for instance, when you talked about the Venus Jupiter conjunction. That happens every year. However, this one was really a big deal because Jupiter was in Pisces and in Jupiter's domicile, and Venus was in Venus's exaltation. And so it was just like this super whammy Pisces energy, um, which I guess was benefic. We talked about that a little bit. It's kind of like too much of a good thing is not necessarily always the best.
Right.
But
Halloween is one night for a reason.
right,
And then you feel really sick if you eat all of your candy at once.
yes. Or maybe you just can't handle that diet and you just need a little bit of balance. Yeah. So say how Neptune was involved in that as well. So there we have our slow moving planet getting smushed in with faster moving planets, and it just became a way bigger transit for people who had anything um, in the mutable signs towards 20 degrees to 25 degrees of the mutable signs. And so when I say mutable signs, we have a class at Starsdance that talks all about aspects and how to tell when you're having, how to read an aspect and know what an aspect is. And so Pisces is a mutable sign, and all the other mutable signs, Gemini, Sagittarius, and Virgo, if they're clustered around the same degrees, so say, let's just guess 20 to 25 degrees, that means that the natal planet that's in those mutable degrees will be transited by either a square or an opposition or a conjunction if your natal planets are in Pisces. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's a lot. And that's why we're going to have a whole class, right?
we're gonna have a whole class. Yeah, right. It's a lot of things because, yeah, the mundane planets, the mundane transits. So we just had that of Venus and Jupiter, as well as a personal planet, Venus and Neptune, activating. Just that's how they activate and work together. But Venus by itself will be a good couple of days, but not a big deal, you know. Which also brings in my mind how I work with astrology, which is with a lot of intention and mindfulness, magic. And so if you are, say, if I'm working on my communication skills, if that's what I want to work on over a longer period of time, I might really use those times when the sun and Mercury and Mars are in Gemini or something, like there's nothing that tells us we can't pay attention to those faster moving transits, but they're not going to slap us up against the side of our head as much. Um, yeah. So that's actually what got me into astrology. Were the transits. I was thinking about that when I was thinking about this class, is that I had taken an introduction to an astrology class and learned a lot. And it was kind of theoretically interesting. But then I got into the time of my life where everything felt like it was kind of like up for review. And I had a friend who was an astrologer and she gave me a reading, and I was having the classic Uranus opposition, which happens in your early 40s, where everything in your life, you review it and you're just like at this crossroads of change. And
Is this the typical midlife crisis
in life,
time?
and I just became like obsessed with astrology. So yeah, I mean, do any of you remember the first time you noticed a transit? Did that have like, it's like, oh, there's something happening here. There's, it explains things in your life.
Yeah, I noticed because most of the transits when I was first getting into astrology, I was like carefully looking at them, like Saturn, especially I was looking at, but I wasn't really paying as much attention to the outer planets. And last year I noticed this like uneasy feeling, and I was looking at the chart of the moment and realized Uranus was on my moon. And I just like before wasn't paying attention. Like I just was like, we're focusing on the personal planets right now. I'm not looking at Neptune or Pluto or Uranus. And I was like, whoa, that's what I was feeling, because it was such an intense, uneasy feeling of like, this is not me being authentic. I need to change. And then I was like, it's really uncomfortable. And I was like, okay, that's what that was. And then, yeah, of course it retrograded backwards and then went back again. But now I'm much more like, okay, that's what that was. And now I can like work with that energy. So it was very comforting to realize that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another thing that transits can do is if it's a planet that maybe in your natal chart you haven't been really utilizing, or it's like you're not in touch with what it's about or wants, a transit like especially Uranus, which is a wake up call always, will then bring that planet online in a really stronger way, like yourself more. I think that's one of the things I notice about transits. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I had been paying attention, but I hadn't really seen like the gravity of it. Wasn't until I had a Neptune transit last year, and then it was like, oh, that's what this energy actually is.
Mhm.
um, so it was, I mean, and it was good to know, for me at least, to be able to know, like, okay, Neptune's going to transit over this point. I had a Neptune over natal Jupiter. Um, and so it was like Neptune's going to transit over this natal Jupiter a number of times. And each time the intensity of it lessened. Like the first time it was like, oh my sweet God, 3 months of this, I cannot even. But then like the next time a month, the next time a week, right? Like every time it was like, okay, if I dealt with the issue and I like the challenge that Neptune was bringing to my Jupiter, then it was easier to move. Like it wasn't like that wasn't going to happen, but that it was be like, I can recognize this. This is the things I need to do. These are the lessons I've learned. Okay, cool.
Mhm.
And I think that just having that sky weather clock as a guide is useful, even if it's like, oh, okay, cool. I haven't had it yet, but eventually I will have a Neptune opposition, or not Neptune opposition, a Uranus opposition. God, if I live long enough to have a Neptune opposition, that'd be great. Um, a Uranus opposition, and I'll know, like, okay, this is what's happening. What is the thing happening, and what do I need to assess? And I think that might prevent me from buying a sports car, you know. I mean, you don't
Mhm. Right.
Yeah, knowledge is power.
this car.
Definitely.
um, right, but maybe I can make that decision a little more consciously of
Mhm.
sports car. I don't actually have a desire for a sports car, but I live in a place with a lot of potholes.
Yeah. So one of the things that I know that it can bring relief about transits is to know that they will end. I mean, that's immeasurably useful. Not only knowing, okay, this is why this is, or this is how this feels, but that it will end, and we do our best. We do our best to make it a meaningful experience, but sometimes just knowing it's going to end is enough. Some of the transits which are challenging. Some transits we want to last a little longer and they're gone. Um, so Pluto can have a reputation of being a hard transit, but Pluto can also be incredibly enlivening, and feeling like just, that kind of like energy running through you, and you just have this sort of sense of more power. And that can be sad when that's over, because it's kind of I think it's a sexual energy. I think it's like a really charismatic, driving, dynamic energy.
Yeah.
So, but
Speaking as a Venus Pluto person, I agree.
yeah, Exactly, right? So we can miss those transits too, even when and they can also be challenging at the same time. Yeah. Would you like to look at a couple of ways that, we can look at transits? I'm gonna um, share my screen. We're gonna look at Lizzo's chart. Let's see here. Did I get it? Oh, here it is. Yeah. So and you see it? Is it really small? Do I need to make it bigger? I'll make it bigger. To me anyway. So this is we were talking about Lizzo on our Discord channel, which is a great part of Starsdance Mystery School, I think. And on our Discord channel, we bring up all kinds of topics, or our server, in other words. And in this channel, we were discussing Lizzo's chart. And so this is what we call a bi-wheel. So in the center are Lizzo's natal planets in position. And the outside wheel is where the planets are today. So these are representing Lizzo's transits. So the more you get familiar with looking at charts, the more you know how to read aspects. And like I said, we have a great class on aspects and learning how to notice what aspects are. The easier it is to kind of just like look and see. One of the things I automatically do is I'll go to those outer planets first and say, like, let's look here at Pluto. Pluto's at 28 degrees Capricorn. So I am going to see, first, what house is Pluto in? Is it going to cross an angle? These are called the angles. This is the ascendant, descendant, midheaven, nadir. And so if Pluto were close to one of those angles, that would be an important thing. But Pluto isn't. And then I would say, well, are there any planets or points at the end of a cardinal sign? And so that would be Capricorn and Libra, Aries, and Cancer. And in fact, really, Lizzo is not having, I don't see any of those planets. What I'm seeing are a bunch of Capricorn planets here. So earlier in Lizzo, like in around 2008, Lizzo was having quite a few transits. And if I knew her biography, I'm sure some stuff was going on. But right now, there's nothing at the end of a cardinal sign. So then I would look at Neptune. We have Neptune at 24. Not, very recently, Neptune was going over Lizzo's notes, and that would have been a really important, time for her to reorient her life and see if she's following that life path that, she's meant to follow. That's kind of what the nodes are about. So that would have been a really important time, Neptune being a planet that dissolves things so that we come back with a reformed sense of what we have faith in. I think it's how I see it. What we have faith in, what we believe, what we believe is the meaning, the more transcendent kind of cosmic meaning of life. Neptune can bring that. And so Lizzo having the North Node in Pisces, she's meant to grow in that direction. So that would have been a very important period for her. But also, like we just said, when Jupiter and Venus were very recently moving through this. So there's been some inspiration, I bet, coming her way, and maybe a reorientation to what she believes that guides her through life. That's maybe how I would see that. So that Neptune's definitely been an influence. Uranus, as we can see up here at 14 degrees Taurus. Recently, Jupiter is at 11 degrees, and soon Neptune is going to come across Lizzo's Mercury. And so that is, Mercury being the planet of our thoughts and communication, just kind of our inventiveness. And Uranus activating Mercury could be a very creative period of time for Lizzo, a time where her message gets really big. And Uranus being, I mean, it can bring chaos, but it can also bring awakening and sort of revitalization. Like, so that is a transit that Lizzo is having. Lizzo has also been having Uranus square Mars. So this is Taurus is a fixed sign, Mars is a fixed sign, and those numbers are really close, right? 15, 11, 13. So that means that Mars is square Jupiter and Mercury, and Uranus is waking up a really big part of Lizzo's chart. What can do you have any kind of thoughts about this? Um,
I mean, the
Mars.
first thing I saw was, oh, look at that. Look at the nice solar return she just had.
Yeah, she just had a birthday.
Yeah.
Really dynamic, right? Really. Also an eclipse, pretty much like 1 degree within her Jupiter. So yeah, this
And
is.
recently a few months ago, a Mars return, which
Mhm,
at least for me, knowing those happen every 2 years and seeing approximately and
mhm,
seeing when those happen is an interesting time to reflect on. If
mhm,
nothing, even if in the moment it's like,
mhm.
so that's what that feels very, and like those times have all been very personal. I know she's a famous person.
Yeah.
So like that could have been something that isn't seen by other people, but that she would have experienced herself.
Mhm.
Um, and then what else am I seeing here?
And as we can see, it's actually a T
Yeah.
square of Jupiter, Pluto, and Mars. So that is even a more that's a complex energy in Lizzo's chart that has been activated and awakened by Uranus.
Mm. Well,
Uh,
and this Uranus is going to transit midheaven
mm-hmm,
and the public life. And what is midheaven at 22?
mm-hmm,
Yeah.
yep.
Oh, and the nodes are at 22. So
That's another transit. So the nodes move, they move backwards through the zodiac. So the transiting node, the north node at 22 degrees Taurus is exactly on Lizzo's midheaven. And
Whoa.
I would think the midheaven being about career, uh,
Mm.
there's just like like she's got an album that's about to come out, and she just had a TV show that was really super popular, and I think that she's just getting that energy
She
of.
started a business too, a
Oh yeah,
clothing business.
yeah, a clothing business, right? So
Yeah.
lots of things going on. And I think because Mars is involved, she can put a lot of energy into it. And maybe, one of the things is over the long term of this transit, learning how to not overextend, not go, like um, noticing how that energy can go too big or bigger and might affect her health because that Mars is in the sixth house of health. So yeah, there's some things to think about for Lizzo. Mm, yeah. So that's basically one way, we look at a bi-wheel, we look at that. We also, here is what I think everyone who really wants to track their transits needs to get, which is probably backwards, right? An ephemeris. So this is a listing of, can you see this? Maybe I need to stop sharing my screen so you can see it better.
try it. Yeah, do that. But
Yeah,
they're
so
very tiny, tiny, tiny.
very small script. But this particular ephemeris goes from 1950 to 2050. So I can look up any time in my life with an ephemeris, and like, here I've got May 1971, and I was alive then, and see where was Mars, where was Saturn, and look up important times in our lives and see what planets were transiting our chart. This is a really good resource for starting to notice the impact of transits in your life. So the bi-wheel is one way, looking at an ephemeris. There's another way. I think I want to see if I can do this. So you can get a list of transits with software, with computer software. Let's see, let me do this. Which you can plot out for a year. Let's see if this works. Okay, right. I'm going to share my screen again and show you what I mean. This is a list of Lizzo's transits for 14 months starting the end of March. And this first list of glyphs are the transiting planets. This is the aspect that they are making to the natal points and planets. Then we've got the date, the exact date. We even have the exact time. And then we have the position of the first planet, the transiting planet, whether it's moving retrograde or direct, and then the position of the natal planet. So this can also be a great way to track your transits. So for instance, we can see that this right here, this line is the sun is eclipsed on April 30th at 10 degrees Taurus. And as you remember, Lizzo's Jupiter was at 11 degrees Taurus. So that means that maybe some unexpected changes is happening in Lizzo's life. You know, there's a lot of attention on her career, but, you know, there may have been something that represents a sort of Jupiter piece of her chart that was unexpected. So that's, you know, one way. Another thing that I track when I'm tracking transits is I notice the stations. So this here means Pluto stationed retrograde on April 29th at 28 degrees Capricorn. If Lizzo had had anything at 28 degrees Capricorn, that would mean that Pluto was stationing on that point, and that is a pretty powerful time. Stations of planets make the planet stronger. So if we're having a transit from a planet, then I want to know what degree that station is happening and compare it to the natal planet. So yeah. Another thing that's going on, I see by this list, is that Saturn is squaring Lizzo's midheaven. It's happened once already, and it's coming back in August. So that's another thing we can track. Are not only transits to the natal planets, but to the angles and points in the chart as well. Yeah. So it's a lot to track.
Yeah. Do you feel like there's like so there's so many aspects, right? Like is there ones you preference, like the conjunctions on points, the oppositions, the squares, the sextiles? Like there's so many options. Are
Mhm,
there ones that you have found in your years of being an astrologer that
mhm.
um what's the word
More
I want?
impactful,
Yeah,
right?
that are more impactful for your clients, that are more impactful for you, that you're like, oh, I want to pay really close attention to. These are like my top three. The other one's important to notice, but like
Yes.
ones I look at most.
Well, I think conjunctions, squares, and oppositions are the most important. Um, Conjunctions represent a merging or a blending, but also a beginning. Like that's a new cycle beginning when there's a conjunction. So conjunctions aren't necessarily problematic or a hard time. Um, but there is a sense in there of, oh, I'm beginning something new. A square can be the most challenging, I think, where there's something coming that really needs to be figured out and worked with. The opposition is where we can actually feel like something is opposing us or something, we're getting that sense of needing to integrate another thing, an opposing type of thing. So those are definitely, I think of the quincunx aspect, which is 150 degrees, is not always considered a major aspect to every astrologer. I use them quite a bit, especially in a natal chart. And so for me, they are just kind of a little bit less impactful, but they're stressful. Those are the aspects that cause stress and a need to adjust. So for instance, one of the important things to look at is the whole picture. Like if you're just isolating one thing, like Saturn is quincunx my Mars, that might not be as important. But what if Saturn is quincunxing your Mars and squaring your Uranus and opposing your like if it just piles on, that quincunx aspect could be just kind of more of intensity, added intensity. So it's good to think of the whole picture. Um, and then the sextiles and trines are, I had one teacher who said that she doesn't even look at them, but I don't agree, because they're the ones that are going to give us some energy, some support. And it's nice to know they can really moderate a difficult time. So if you're having a difficult Pluto transit, but also, Pluto might be squaring something, but also sextiling something else, that helps, kind of helps to ease it. So I track those too. Those are the ones I track. But there are other aspects, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if I think for me, like I'll notice like how close the degree is for like that'll kind of like help me prioritize which one to pay more attention to at the moment. If I can't prioritize all of them, I'll
Right.
just see like which one has the more exact degree.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, but I like the conjunctions as beginnings. I haven't thought of it that way before, of
Mm-hmm.
like it being the beginning of a story.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, that's what happens at a new moon is the moon and sun come together. I think the lunar cycle is a great template for figuring out how aspects feel. Although in a lunar cycle, we're also using some minor aspects. We're using the semi-square and the sesquiquadrate, but those conjunctions, squares, and oppositions are a part of a lunar cycle, and they really help us to understand what that energy is like. Mhm. Yeah. So, what kind of thoughts or insights do you have about? Oh yeah, we are. We're at time. Thanks, Hemlock, for reminding me. I think this might be a good time to come to a close, unless you've got some things you want to share. I appreciate your questions.
Yeah, that was really helpful. Thank you.
Sure. Okay.
I'm looking forward to the class.
Yeah. Good. Well, thank you.
Good luck, everyone, for your transits.
Yeah.